Today, 29th of July, was Earth Overshoot Day, a day that is commemorated every year. To tell us a bit more about what it is, what it means, what it implies, I'm happy to welcome Dr. Jako Volschenk. Jako is a senior lecturer at the business school, specializing especially in strategy and sustainability. So welcome, Jako.
Thank you, Andre.
Earth Overshoot Day, what does it mean? What are we overshooting?
Andre, the easiest way to explain it is to think about nature as a big savings account, and that we wish to live off the interest of that savings account every year. And sometimes it happens that you overspend during that year and that you have to eat into your savings, into your capital. Now, effectively, yesterday was the day that we've spent all the interest for the year, and now we're eating into our savings. From an environmental point of view, every year we get an environmental dividend or interest in the form of fish, trees, etc. And that typically, like a fish species, could accumulate by about 20% every year. And we've spent that 20%, and now we're eating into the capital. The downside of that is by next year there's less capital, which means there's less interest. So unless we slow down the spending, our consumption will even happen faster during the year. And that's what we're currently seeing, is that by every year that Earth Overshoot Day happens 3 or 4 days earlier, instead of pushing it back.
And this obviously accumulates over time. It's almost like compound interest. So in 10 or 20 years' time, I presume we might be looking at May, and then our poor children are going to pay the price.
Correct, absolutely. And you know, we're seeing the number of species that is at the verge of extinction is increasing every year. Currently, the level of extinction is 100 to 1,000 times above what that base rate should be. So scientists, to some extent, are starting to think about, are we possibly entering the 6th mass extinction? So that we may experience the end of humanity in the next 100 years.
29th of July was sort of the global average. I presume these calculations are done for individual countries or regions, like South Africa. Do we have a similar date for South Africa?
Correct. There are indeed country overshoot days. So Europe was much earlier during the year, as you would expect of a developed country. But South Africa was on the 8th of July, so about 20 days ago, which is reflective of one thing in particular, and is that our natural resources are less than most other countries. So even though our per capita consumption may not be at exactly the level of Europe or other regions or countries, the fact that we've got so little natural capital means that we can only spend so much. So we've overspent by the 8th of July. If you take that calculation of consumption divided by how much is available, if all the Earth was like South Africa and spending like South Africans, or consuming like South Africans, we would have to have 2 Earths to sustain us.
And so you mentioned the word natural capital. What is that exactly?
Natural capital reflects the value. We say something of capital is something that's worth saving, or something that has value. Natural capital reflects the value that nature has, and it comes in the form of raw material like fish, trees, etc. But it also comes in the form of the services provided by nature. So nature provides us with oxygen. If you have many frogs, you will also have less mosquitoes, so there's a bit of disease control. And in the third place, nature also acts as a sink. So the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is reduced by the number of trees. And on that point, I mean, currently we're losing about 30 rugby fields of forests every day. So we're cutting back the lungs of the earth. And so the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which we believe contributes to climate change, that situation is just worsening every day.
I remember years ago using an app on one of the websites where you could calculate as a family, as an individual family, how many Earths you are consuming.
Correct.
And I recall they asked questions such as traveling to and from work, using a car, traveling by plane, how much you eat, etc. And it adds up very quickly. I won't divulge my result, but it was horrifying.
Absolutely, and if you think about just the situation in Cape Town, we've got quite severe problems with traffic. But if you look at the number of cars every morning, the average car, the global statistic is 1.3 people per car that travels. And if you could just half that number, we would have less congestion, we would spend less time on the road, leading to more productive time for companies to have their people with them. But we definitely need to start thinking more of using public transport and making public transport available. For every bus of 20 people, that's 20 cars that you're taking off the road. And at the same time, the carbon footprint of that mode of transport is much less. We also have to think as companies of whether we really need to have people work from the offices. It's much more possible with technology to have remote work, and in that way try to reduce the footprints of what we're doing. Ultimately, if we want to believe that companies will exist in 50 years from now, we start to work towards that solution.
Yeah, to add insult to injury, you mentioned cars. If we get caught up in a traffic jam and your car is idling over, it's consuming petrol, which is adding to the GDP. So in terms of conventional measures of economic activity, a traffic jam actually enhances your GDP, which makes a mockery of these.
Absolutely, there's quite a few examples of that. For that reason, countries like Bhutan have switched to the happiness index, which makes a lot of sense because quite often owning more, consuming more doesn't necessarily make people more happier. We find that relationships and experiences are far better for people to remain happy in the long term. Globally, there's a movement called the voluntary simplicity movement, which says, well, let me live in a smaller house, which means I don't have to earn such a big salary, which doesn't mean I have to work that many hours, which means I can actually spend more time doing things I enjoy and spending more time with my family. So there are certainly more awareness about this, but not nearly at the level that is required currently.
Maybe we can start ending off on that note. It seems to me that fundamentally, speaking as an economist, it's again about supply and demand. The demand for nice things exceeds nature's capabilities to provide them. But bring it down to South Africa possibly, and businesses here, and even households. First of all, what's the so what of it? If we leave things unattended, what's the possible outcome in 10, 20, 30, 40 years? And secondly, can we do anything about it? If so, what?
Andre, I think it's a scary thought. I've recently seen a financial services company talk about the first person that will turn 200 has already been born. But unfortunately, in the current state of the environment, that's not going to happen. And it's not going to be that our age is a limit, it's just that the environment cannot support that. So if we continue the way we are, I can't put a time limit on it, but we know that there will be collapse. If we don't do something, the earth just can't sustain that. What can be done about it? Certainly, I think we've spoken before about population control, thinking about maybe cutting back, not in a regulatory way possibly, but educating people more about having fewer children and why that's good for many reasons. At the same time, also consuming less per person would be an option. And then from a corporate, from a company point of view, also thinking about the models that we use. I often use the example of a geyser for hot water. That if I'm a producer of geysers, I have to make my geyser to break, otherwise I will go out of business in 10 years from now. So my geyser is made to break after 3 years, but if I change that model to sell hot water, in other words a service, rather than a geyser, then I will make my geyser to last forever because I don't want to do any maintenance. So it certainly speaks to the words along circular economy, that kind of more recycling, more service economy, those kind of things.
So I suppose the major message now is we need much greater awareness amongst everybody, including our government leaders, businesses, consumers have a strong vote. So thank you for sharing these sometimes frightening thoughts, but it's been forewarned is forearmed. Let's hope that next year Earth Overshoot Day remains the 29th of July. It doesn't get even worse, but I suppose that's a faint hope.
I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you.